The Harry Potter series makes Britain often, and by often I mean always, feel like the centre of all wizarding conflict. Voldemort, Death Eaters, First Wizarding War, Second Wizarding War, all that good stuff. But to me, the idea that almost all of the global wizarding problems can be narrowed down to a 200,000 square kilometre stretch of islands has always felt a little hard to believe. And while sure, 200,000 square kilometres sounds like a lot, let's not forget that Earth's surface area is over 510 million. That means the only dark wizards we ever talk about are tyrannizing 0.043% of the planet's total surface area. And yes, I know measuring it this way is a little absurd, especially since a huge portion of Earth's 510 million square kilometers is ocean, and dark wizards aren't building underwater empires in the middle of the Atlantic, but the point still stands. The Harry Potter books can sometimes make it feel as though nearly every major magical crisis in history either began in Britain, ended in Britain, or somehow circled back to Britain eventually. It's far too Britain-centric. So, what do we think? Does Voldemort and the rise of the Death Eaters feel like the biggest deal in the world just because it's so close to home? Because it's the only thing the series focuses on? Or is it far more likely that the rest of the world has their own conflicts to deal with that have, this might shock you, nothing to do with Voldemort? Today we're going to be exploring all of that and more as we unpack international conflicts of the wizarding world, taking a closer look at whether there are other dark threats or dark wizards besides Voldemort. Let's dive in. Hey everyone, welcome to another installment of Harry Potter Theory. The more you look at the wider wizarding world, the harder it becomes to believe that Britain was uniquely responsible for producing virtually all serious magical threats. More likely, Britain is simply the part of the wizarding world we know best. It's where Harry lived, where Hogwarts is tied culturally and politically, where the ministry we follow operates, and where Voldemort chose to build his power base. That means the story zooms in on British conflict, but that is very different from saying British conflict was the only conflict. And if we move beyond the main 7 books and get into the weeds a little bit, there is some evidence that dark magic and dangerous wizards were in other countries as well. But let's quickly get the most obvious one out of the way: Grindelwald. Unlike Voldemort, Grindelwald was never really just Britain's problem. He was something much bigger. When you look at his history, it's tied far more closely to continental Europe, to Durmstrang, to Nurmengard, and to a much broader ideological movement that spread well beyond the borders of any single ministry. Voldemort always felt like a national crisis that threatened to spill outward, while Grindelwald felt more like the opposite, the kind of wizard whose influence was international from the outset. And as obvious as it may seem, the existence of Grindelwald alone tells us Voldemort was not some once-in-history anomaly. The wizarding world had already seen a dark wizard whose threat extended far beyond any one country. In fact, if we go by the broader timeline, Grindelwald's conflict with the wizarding world wasn't some brief flare-up. By 1927, he was already operating internationally. By 1932, he was openly attempting to seize even more influence through his bid to become Supreme Mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards. And by 1945, it still took Albus Dumbledore himself to finally bring him down. That's nearly 2 decades of growing influence, open conflict, political ambition, and international instability. Nothing to do with Britain specifically. And even his ambitions reflected that scale. He wasn't just trying to dominate one country's ministry the way Voldemort eventually did in Britain. He was making a play for leadership at the level of the International Confederation of Wizards itself. Voldemort was catastrophic for Wizarding Britain. Grindelwald was trying to shape the future of the wizarding world at large. Grindelwald may be an obvious one to hone in on here, but he's probably the best example of a dark wizard at large in the last century. And if you go further back, the pattern continues. In fact, one of the darkest wizards ever mentioned in the lore wasn't British either. It was Herpo the Foul, an ancient Greek dark wizard whose magical experiments were so twisted that his name still carries weight centuries later. And while he may not have tried to build some vast political movement or impose himself over the wizarding world in the way Grindelwald or Voldemort did, it doesn't make him any less horrifying, or any less of a dark wizard. If anything, it just makes him a different kind of threat. Less of a tyrant perhaps, but still one of the most grotesque and dangerous dark arts practitioners imaginable. Herpo is commonly credited with creating the first basilisk, and even worse, the first known Horcrux. Voldemort is usually the name most people associate with Horcruxes, but Voldemort didn't invent them. He was following a path that someone else had already carved out long before him. In other words, some of the darkest and most disturbing branches of magic we know about didn't come out of Britain at all. They came out of ancient Greece. We also need to consider that while producing Horcruxes is inherently horrific, Voldemort had a blueprint. Herpo didn't. And I can't even begin to imagine the kind of horrifying experimentation it would have taken to become the first wizard in history to actually figure that out. Wizards would have been looking for ways to do exactly what Voldemort did for years, and some of the ways they would have tried would have killed them. So I imagine it, well, they're huge parallels. Splitting the atom would be a very good parallel in our world. I do imagine that other people are going to have tried. I think it would be naive not to think that people have been trying for a long time, and thought they succeeded and hadn't, or else maimed themselves or killed themselves in the attempt. It's such a dangerous thing to do. There you have it, a dark wizard that wasn't British. And interestingly, the next wizard I want to discuss was also Greek, or at least it looks that way. Now, Acristus isn't especially well known, at least not compared to someone like Grindelwald or Voldemort, but he absolutely left his mark on wizarding history, and not in a good way. This was a wizard remembered not for political ambition, grand ideology, or building some vast movement, but for being an utterly depraved practitioner of the darkest magic imaginable. Very little is actually known about him. We know he was alive sometime around the 15th century, and we know that he was responsible for horrors so severe that his name still lingers in the lore surrounding Azkaban. His nationality has never been confirmed, but his name certainly sounds Greek, or at least Greek adjacent, which has led plenty of people to suspect he may have come from that part of the world. And if that were true, it would make him yet another example of a major dark magical threat emerging far outside Britain. What makes Acristus especially disturbing is that he wasn't some conventional dark wizard trying to dominate others in the way Grindelwald or Voldemort did. He seems to have been something more isolated, more deranged, and in some ways even harder to make sense of. He was the original inhabitant of the island fortress of Azkaban, long before it ever became the prison we know from the books. Back then, it was just an island in the North Sea. Acristus found it, concealed it with powerful charms so that nobody could intentionally locate it, and turned it into his own private chamber of horrors. And what he did there was vile. He lured Muggle sailors to the island, tortured them, and eventually killed them. That was the purpose of the place. Just one dark wizard hidden away from the rest of the world, carrying out the worst kinds of magical experiments on helpless victims. And apparently the longer he remained on the island, the further gone he became. It's said that Acristus descended fully into insanity, becoming so consumed by dark magic that he lost touch with reality altogether. And perhaps the most chilling part of all of it is that some have speculated he may have either created the Dementors, or at the very least drawn them there through whatever twisted magic he was practicing, which is an absolutely horrifying possibility. No followers, no ideology, just suffering, decay, and evil concentrated in one place until it poisoned the island itself. The next example I want to touch on is not quite as far-flung, as it comes from nearby Ireland. Still, even if Ireland technically fell under the authority of the British Ministry of Magic, I think it's close enough to our point to be worth including. This dark force was Gaunt. Gormlaith came from the House of Gaunt, the notoriously pure-blood family descended from Salazar Slytherin himself. So right away, you already know we are not dealing with a well-adjusted person. The Gaunts were fanatical even by wizarding standards, obsessed with blood purity, proud of their ancestry, and deeply hostile to Muggles and anyone they saw as beneath them. And during her lifetime, Gormlaith seems to have inherited all of the worst parts of that legacy and then somehow made them even worse. What makes her especially horrifying is that her evil wasn't abstract or ideological. It was intensely personal. When Gormlaith discovered that her own sister was living too closely with Muggles and helping them, she decided that this was intolerable. So she burned down her sister's home, killing both her sister and brother-in-law, and then took their daughter Isolde for herself. Not to protect her, but to raise her according to her own twisted pure-blood beliefs. And that's where things get even darker. For years, Gormlaith kept Isolde isolated, refused to let her attend Hogwarts, denied her a wand of her own, and used dark magic to keep her in line. She didn't just believe in blood supremacy, she enforced it with fear, cruelty, and total domination over a child. Then, when Isolde eventually escaped and later helped found Ilvermorny in North America, a school that became known for being far more open and tolerant, Gormlaith crossed the Atlantic herself to hunt her down and try to destroy the life she had built. Gormlaith may not have threatened the world on the same scale as Grindelwald, but she is another example of a deeply dangerous dark witch outside the main Voldemort story, and another reminder that Britain didn't have a monopoly on magical cruelty. Now, if this were a video about dark wizards from Britain, I would have a lot more names to work with. In fact, the list of known owners of the Elder Wand alone contains more dark witches and wizards than this list does. But unfortunately, I can only go off what canon actually gives us, and canon seems to present a wildly disproportionate number of dark magical threats coming from Britain. I'm not sure what that says about Britain as a whole, but it probably isn't a good thing. I guess now the question is, if Britain was the only one dealing with a dark wizard, how come no one stepped in to help? I can't imagine Voldemort and his Death Eaters would have fared too well against an international coalition of powerful witches and wizards. As it happens, I've actually already made a video on this exact topic called The Real Reason No One Helped Britain Against Voldemort. But to round out today's video, I want to summarize my best argument, that other countries actually looked down on magical Britain and didn't want to help. In my research, I came across an interesting theory regarding why other countries in the wizarding world may have been hesitant to help Britain. You see, while it might seem strange that not a single outsider came to their aid, it becomes less surprising when we consider the tumultuous state of magical Britain itself. One key factor to consider here is the occurrence of 2 wizarding wars within a relatively short period. Although this isn't the fault of the country itself, the fact that Voldemort was able to gather such a significant number of followers who believed in the supremacy of pureblood wizards doesn't reflect particularly well on the country itself. Furthermore, it sends the message to other countries that magical Britain is in a perpetual state of destabilization. The perception of Britain's intolerance is further reinforced by the statue Harry sees at the Ministry of Magic, a statue oddly named the Fountain of Magical Brethren. Halfway down the hall is a fountain. A group of golden statues, larger than life-size, stood in the middle of a circular pool. Tallest of all of them was a noble-looking wizard with his wand pointing straight up in the air. Grouped around him were a beautiful witch, a centaur, a goblin, and a house elf. The last 3 were all looking adoringly up at the witch and wizard. Glittering jets of water were flying from the ends of the 2 wands, the point of the centaur's arrow, the tip of the goblin's hat, and each of the house elf's ears. The statue, which doesn't show any sort of brotherhood I've seen, quite clearly sends the message that other wizarding world creatures are beneath witches and wizards, depicting them as staring up at the witch and wizard adoringly, as if they are some sort of spectacle. And this statue is on display at the Ministry of Magic, the location of Britain's primary magical governmental body. If that doesn't send some sort of a message to the outside world, then I don't know what does. From an outside perspective, I believe that wizarding Britain would exude a significant sense of xenophobia and species-based discrimination, leading other countries to disassociate themselves from such a backward society. And in case the 2 concurrent wizarding wars weren't enough to send the message that Britain was unstable, I imagine that the rampant corruption within the Ministry of Magic would send this message home even further. The incompetence of the Minister for Magic, the presence of former Death Eaters in high-ranking positions, like Lucius Malfoy, and the instances of bribes and manipulation indicate that there are deep-rooted issues at the Ministry. Furthermore, the biased handling of Harry's hearing and the control the government has over media outlets like the Daily Prophet only raises further questions about the integrity and transparency of magical Britain's institutions. Now let's point the crosshairs at Britain's premier location for magical education, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. While I imagine that Hogwarts invokes a sense of pride in many, it's important to note that the school, in all of its glory, still has a number of flaws. For example, while having all children attend a single school should promote unity, the reality is that the houses within the school only further foster division and internal conflict. One of these houses in particular, Slytherin, fundamentally advocates for the idea of a superior pureblood race. The founder of the school and house, Salazar Slytherin, even created a deadly creature to protect his vision of excluding Muggle-born students. Why is a house that was founded on such backwards principles and that has historically produced nearly every dark witch and wizard even be allowed to exist? To the outside world, this would appear preposterous. The house and its associated philosophies are a veritable breeding ground for individuals of dubious morality, only further perpetuating so many of the intolerance-related issues ingrained in wizarding society itself. I don't think Ilvermorny or Beauxbaton have houses like this, so why Hogwarts? The last point that I want to focus on is Britain's singular wizarding prison, Azkaban. At one point in wizarding history, there were more prisons up and down the country, but the ministry later made the executive decision to house all criminals in the same place, regardless of the severity of their crime. The Ministry of Magic felt that the small wizarding prisons that existed up and down the country in various towns and villages posed a security risk, because attempts by incarcerated witches and wizards to break out often led to undesirable bangs, smells, and light shows. A purpose-built prison, located on some remote Hebridean island, was preferred, and plans had been drawn up when Damocles Rowell became Minister for Magic. The fact that there's only one prison, which basically doubles as a torture chamber due to the presence of Dementors, reflects a lack of due process, and suggests that there are significant human rights violations taking place. Furthermore, the use of Azkaban as a prison for perpetrators of all types of crimes, regardless of the severity, seems highly inappropriate, especially when we consider the harsh conditions and psychological impact of imprisonment there. If we consider all of the significant issues with magical Britain noted above, can you really blame the international wizarding community for simply not wanting to get involved? Also, perhaps I just answered my own question in that segment. Maybe magical Britain has all of these dark wizards because of these systemic issues. Either way, it's a weird place to be when it comes to the magical world. At least there's lots to talk about. And that's it for today's video. Did I miss any dark wizards? Let me know down in the comment section below. Also, if you enjoyed the content, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, remember, it does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live.